Live by the sword, die by the sword, at least politically speaking. That has been the debate experience for Kamala Harris through 2 rounds now. In round 1, she attacked Joe Biden for the indefensible racism of not wanting federally mandated busing schemes to enforce arbitrary state-prescribed diversity quotas in schools, and that set her up to be attacked in round 2 by Tulsi Gabbard over her record as California State Attorney General. And I mean directly set it up. It was the explicit context for the question.
Congresswoman Gabbard, you took issue with Senator Harris confronting Vice President Biden at the last debate. You called it a, quote, false accusation that Joe Biden is a racist. What's your response?
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. She put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California, and she fought to keep cash bail system in place. That impacts poor people in the worst kind of way. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
And Kamala Harris didn't really have a good answer.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, actually doing the work to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform.
I saw the need for reform, and so I reformed that which was in need of reform, thus reforming what anyone even thought was reformable at all. Yeah, it wasn't a specific defense. It was just an abstract one that relied heavily on a progressive buzzword to use as a crutch to help her limp away from a beatdown that she herself invited. She didn't have a specific defense because the fact check on Tulsi Gabbard's claims is mostly true. Now, of course, there's some missing context and some exaggeration, as there's bound to be anytime you're compressing an entire legal career into a few bullet points. But according to the San Jose Mercury News, Kamala Harris did block DNA testing that many thought would have overturned the murder conviction of a death row inmate. She did oppose early release of prisoners, citing the need for inmate firefighting labor, though it's not true, she argued, to keep prisoners beyond their sentences, just not to release them early. As San Francisco District Attorney, Harris did favor raising cash bail for defendants of gun crimes. While the statistic for putting 1,500 people in jail for weed is somewhat unfair, that number refers to prosecutions by district attorneys, while Kamala Harris was Attorney General, not cases Kamala herself personally prosecuted, it was still her Justice Department. And we know Kamala herself did prosecute such cases while she was a district attorney. And we all know that she laughed about her own marijuana consumption because we all heard her do it just a few months back in February.
Have you ever smoked?
I have.
Okay. Like in
and
college,
I inhaled. I did inhale.
Okay.
It was a long time ago.
I mean, was it in college? What were you listening to when you was high? What was on? What song was it?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, yeah, definitely Snoop. Tupac, for sure.
Remember, that comment also became controversial because it sounds like Kamala is saying she listened to Snoop and Tupac while high in college. The problem being that Kamala Harris graduated college before either of them released their first albums, and so it would appear that Kamala is borrowing the Hillary Clinton hot sauce strategy for a certain urban appeal. But her defenders say no, Kamala didn't lie. She was talking about what she liked to listen to when she was high generally, not specifically in college. Go back and listen to the question, they say. Okay, fine, but if we accept that timeline, both of these guys released their debut albums in 1991. Kamala Harris was Alameda County Deputy District Attorney starting in 1990. Is your revised claim that she was prosecuting people for weed by day and blazing to gangster rap by night? If so, that's still a point for Tulsi. And Kamala's defense somehow became worse after the debate. I get it. In the heat of the moment, it can be tough to defend yourself effectively from surprise attack. But she had time to think about it and debrief with her advisors, and then gave this terrible response to Anderson Cooper.
Did you expect that from Tulsi Gabbard?
Well, I mean, listen, this is going to sound immodest, but I'm obviously a top-tier candidate, and so I did expect that I would be on the stage and take hits tonight because there are a lot of people that are trying to make the stage for the next debate, and especially when people are at 0 or 1% or whatever she might be at.
Well, I don't want to sound immodest, but I'm prom queen and she's a trash hoe. First of all, polling standings have nothing to do with the truth or falsehood of Tulsi's claims. Is she correct about your record or is she not? And second, this argument can be used to dismiss everything you said about Joe Biden just a month ago. Well, Joe is a top-tier candidate. Of course, some bottom feeder like Kamala Harris would try to claw at him. She's desperate. If what Tulsi said is invalid for this reason, so is what you said, Kamala. And the exchange looks like a win for Tulsi overall. She's creeping on the donation threshold to qualify for the next debate. We'll see if she hits the 2% polling support necessary. Aggregated polling data currently have her at 1, but several individual polls have her at 2 or higher. And of course, Google searches aren't necessarily indicative of support, but they are a good proxy for interest. And Tulsi was the most Googled candidate after the debate in every state in the union. And so Kamala is left to re-strategize, just as she left Joe Biden to do after the first debate. And the obvious strategy is to prepare for more scrutiny on her prosecutorial record, prepare to explain it, prepare to defend it, prepare to say how Tulsi was wrong in characterizing it. But that's not the strategy that Kamala's communications team is going with, at least immediately. And this is where it gets weird. As Kamala was tasting her own medicine on stage on Wednesday night, her national press secretary was tweeting damage control, telling reporters to be wary of the viral Twitter reaction to the scene, because after all, Tulsi Gabbard is the choice candidate of the Russian propaganda machine. It's a legitimately serious talking point picked up by others as well. New York Times writer and CNN correspondent Wajahat Ali says, beware the Russian bots and their promotion of Tulsi Gabbard and their sowing of racial discord. Right, because Kamala Harris never uses racial discord for political opportunism.
We're going to get to you. Hang on. We're going to get to you.
Stage, I would like to speak on the issue of race.
Nonetheless, this is a warning that MSNBC's Joy Reid says we should take seriously as well. If you see support for Tulsi, it's safe to assume it's a racist Russian front, not just a person who agrees with the message. The article linked from Kamala's press secretary dates back to February, in case you're interested in the evidence for this claim. Back then, there were at least 20 Tulsi Gabbard stories on 3 Moscow-based news websites, and they talked about Tulsi twice as often as better-known Democrats like Biden, Sanders, Harris, and Warren. Convincing, for sure. Hard to argue, but I'll try. Russia is allied with Assad in Syria. Gabbard has been critical of U.S. interventionism and thus isn't hawkish on Syria or Assad. And thus, Russian state actors are more inclined to be favorable to her. There's no conspiracy required to explain that scenario. And it certainly doesn't mean that everybody who finds Tulsi Gabbard persuasive only does so because RT or Sputnik News tells them she's persuasive. No, they watch the debates and listen for themselves unfiltered. And the irony is, those recycling this Russian influence narrative to deflect any whiff of political inconvenience actually undermine its credibility as it applies to the last time around. Hillary Clinton only lost because of Russia, and Tulsi Gabbard only has support because of Russia. If you slow down and look at the facts, you're going to have to pick one. Back when Gabbard launched her campaign in January, she was polling between 0 and 2%. After an entire spring and early summer of apparent Russian propaganda support, she is polling currently between 0 and 2%, with an occasional 3 sprinkled in every so often. Statistically, no meaningful change. Am I to believe this is the full effect of the Russian propaganda machine on display? The very same Russian propaganda machine that influenced our 2016 election, according to the NBC coverage Kamala's press secretary cites? If this is the best that these Russian operatives can do, that their full effort only gets their candidate to the cusp of maybe qualifying for the next round of debates if she's lucky, how did they possibly sway an entire election result in 2016? They can't even swing 1 full polling percentage point for their pick this time, but they outright won it for their pick last time? How did they suddenly become so crappy at their jobs? Or were they always crappy at their jobs and thus didn't have a significant impact on the 2016 election? Was it actually your candidate that was crappy? Take your pick. I just need a little coherence and consistency to buy into this theory, and thus concludes my broadcast from the Kremlin, comrades. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel always. Appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.